should be considering the possibility of trading their quarterback, Kirk Cousins.
Absolutely.
With the Vikings falling to 1-4 and Justin Jefferson going on IR for at least 4 weeks, a lot of people are wondering, is it time to give up on Kirk Cousins? In today's video, I'll go over some potential trade targets as well as why it will or will not happen. To set the stage, in the history of the NFL, teams that are 1-4 have a 2.9% chance to make the playoffs. And Kirk Cousins is on the final year of his contract. This has led many people to think it is just time for the Vikings to give up on the year, tank, get a high draft pick, and hopefully get a quarterback in the draft. However, knowing NFL teams, they're not going to give up quite yet. Because, for example, in 2015, the Chiefs started 1-5 and then won 10 straight games and ended up 11-5. So what this shows is that the Vikings aren't dead yet, and while they're not dead, the team is not going to give up. I mean, quite simply, there's too many people working too hard for them just to give up for an entire year, which probably involves them getting fired. But looking at their schedule, they really can't afford almost any more losses. In the next 5 weeks, they have games against the Bears, the 49ers, the Packers, the Falcons, and the Saints. Now, of course, going into these, the 49ers sounds impossible and the rest sound doable. But the Vikings need to win almost every single one of these games, especially because the Packers and the Bears are division rivals, and the Saints and the Falcons are teams they would be competing with for a wild card spot. But for the purposes of a trade, you can only look at games that take place before the trade deadline, which is October 31st. So the Bears, the 49ers, and the Packers. They have to win 2 of these 3 games to have a legitimate chance of staying alive past the trade deadline. Assuming they go 1-2 in these next 3 games, they're likely dead and it is time to ship off Kirk Cousins. However, there is another wrinkle, and that is that Kirk Cousins has a no trade clause and no one really knows his true thoughts on it. He's been asked, of course, because it's everywhere in the media, and he said he just doesn't like to think about it. So even if the perfect trade scenario shows up, maybe Kirk Cousins just says no and they have to keep him. But let's say the Vikings lose and Kirk Cousins is okay with the trade. I think there are 3 teams that stick out to me that would make good fits for Kirk Cousins, and one of them will surprise you. The first team I think Kirk Cousins could get traded to is the Tennessee Titans. I know you probably don't think about them too often because they're not that popular of a team, but their defense has always been good. However, their offense is very bad this year. Ryan Tannehill has fallen off, and they will clearly look to move on, as they already were going into the year. But if you weren't aware how bad Ryan Tannehill has been, so far he has 2 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. And you may remember, hey, the past 2 years they've drafted 2 pretty high-round quarterbacks in Malik Willis and Will Levis. However, they have both been very bad in the preseason and just don't show that much promise as of yet. And if you don't believe me, then why can't they get on the field over a quarterback who through 5 games has 2 touchdowns and 5 interceptions? But even through this bad quarterback play, they are still 2-3 and only 1 game out of the division lead. They're still very much alive, and they have some weapons such as Derrick Henry and DeAndre Hopkins, who are potentially in their last real years at being elite offensive weapons. And adding a good quarterback like Kirk Cousins could bring this team over the top and bring them into the playoffs. Then my second team is the New York Jets. So of course, this is the team you've heard about. 1, because they have the best supporting cast out of anybody without a good quarterback since Aaron Rodgers went down, and 2, because the media loves New York teams, as you'll be watching them all the time on primetime. But the team is legitimately good, except for Zach Wilson, who, even though he has gotten better, is still bad. The Jets are currently in last place in the NFL in passing yards, and Zach Wilson has 4 touchdowns and 5 interceptions. And even with a dead offense, the defense has kept them in games. They are 2-3, and they were able to hold the Chiefs to 23 points and the Bills just to 16 points. And of course, they have Breece Hall, who's just come back healthy, and Garrett Wilson, who has looked great even with a bad quarterback. You have to think, with Kirk Cousins, this team could maybe even be a Super Bowl threat. And I really don't care that Aaron Rodgers says he's coming back, because I quite simply don't believe it. It's an injury that normally takes a year to come back. How would he come back? So for this year, it's the only year that Kirk Cousins is on contract, and he could bring them deep into the playoffs. However, there is one really big downside with this trade, and that is that Kirk Cousins, one, of course, he's not really meant for prime time, and there's not much more prime time than playing in New York City. So there's a decent chance that Kirk just doesn't want to play in New York. And this could even have some legitimacy, since last time Kirk Cousins was a free agent, he passed up on the Jets, who were offering him more money than the Vikings. Now, of course, at the time, the Vikings had the better roster, so that is also in consideration. But I can't completely rule out that he just doesn't want to play in New York. And then finally, the third team that I think could trade for Kirk Cousins, and that is the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers are 3-2, even though they have one of the worst offenses I have ever watched. The Steelers' offense currently scores 15.8 points per game, and this is including 2 defensive touchdowns and a safety that has already happened this year. So really, they're more like around 12 points per game. This is third worst in the NFL, and watching it, it's not surprising. If the Steelers defense doesn't play absolutely awesome and even score points, the Steelers just can't win. But their defense is full of playmakers, so they've been able to win several games, and they're currently in the lead in their division. So why would a team in first place in their division trade for a new quarterback when they have a quarterback in his second year? Well, if they see the Super Bowl opportunity with a good quarterback, they might take it. And if you're not sure how Kenny has been this year, he has 5 touchdowns and 4 interceptions, which you'll notice is the first quarterback with positive touchdowns over interceptions in this video. But he is 31st in the NFL in QBR. And if you're not a math whiz, that is second worst, and the only one worse than him is Bryce Young. And a lot of people currently blame Canada, their offensive coordinator, because he's bad, but quite simply, I don't think it's just Canada. I think Kenny is a big reason why they haven't been good as well. But while I think Kirk Cousins could be a good fit with the Steelers, this is definitely the most far-fetched, partially because they're in the first place in their division and why would they shake things up, partially because they're the Steelers and they don't make big trades, and then finally because Kenny Pickett is so young and did show a lot of promise in the preseason, so it would be giving up on him a little quick. But if you truly want to win this year, I think you should go for it. This could be the only year you have where the Ravens look shaky, the Browns look pretty bad, but they are the Browns, and then the Bengals also have played very poor and nowhere near their standards. And then finally, what would it cost to trade for Kirk Cousins? And this is a true mystery because he's not young, he's in the last year of his contract, and he has a no trade clause. So no one is for sure. I saw a random person say it would cost 2 third-round picks for him, and then I saw a lot of people saying that's not nearly enough. But if you think back, Jimmy Garoppolo was traded for a second-round pick, and he had only ever started 2 games. Now he was much younger and didn't have the no-trade clause. Also, Sam Bradford was traded for a first-round pick, and Kirk Cousins is a much better quarterback than Sam Bradford. So I don't think anyone really knows what Kirk Cousins would cost, but it wouldn't be cheap. So that, of course, is another flaw in this trade happening. And in all likelihood, he won't get traded because it would be such a disruption to change your quarterback kind of randomly in the middle of the season. And only a team that has a chance to make the playoffs and go far would trade for him, and it would just be such a bold move to make this trade. But I personally hope it happens because I'm not even sure if Justin Jefferson will come back to play when he's healthy again. He might just say he's hurt the rest of the year, sit it out, and wait for his payday. But thanks for watching my video. Please like, subscribe, and stick around for more content.